This was supposed to be Susie Carmichael's big break. The moment where her talent was finally given the opportunity to be showcased on a massive level. But ultimately, it would end up becoming her biggest betrayal. She would be taken advantage of and scammed. But was it really about the money? Or was there something more sinister unfolding in the background? Susie had the talent, the drive, and of course, the passion. So why did it all go wrong? At face value, Susie Sings the Blues is just another episode of All Grown Up, telling yet another story of preteen struggles for our favorite childhood cartoon babies, the Rugrats. But when we peel back the layers and look deeper into the events and implications in this episode, it tells a much darker story. One that's deeply rooted in real-life events that are still unfolding to this very day. That's why today, on our nostalgic walk down memory lane, we're checking out the episode of All Grown Up where Susie was targeted and scammed. Before we get into it though, just a few quick things. I made some brand new exclusive sick members only emojis and some member badges that you can show off down in the comments below. I absolutely love how they turned out. They just spark so much joy for me, and I hope that my members enjoy them also. I have a bunch more that I've made as well, but I need just 2 more members before I can upload them. So with that being said, if you're contemplating a membership, now is an excellent time. With your help, I can upload more wicked emojis for everyone. You'll get access to some videos early, as well as other perks, and it's a great way to support me and my family directly and show your love for these nostalgic walks down memory lane. With that out of the way, thank you so much for clicking on this video and for being a part of my YouTube journey. I appreciate every single one of you, and I hope that you have a phenomenal weekend, and let's get right into it. As this episode starts out, we see Susie on a stage at school singing beautifully in front of Phil, Lil, and Angelica. As she sings, a woman in a suit with pink hair is approaching a nearby corkboard to hang up a business card when Susie's singing catches her attention. She finishes the song and gets off stage as Angelica starts roasting her, telling her that her singing sounds like a sick cat. As Susie roasts her back, calling her Screechelica, the woman with pink hair approaches and interrupts them.
That is some voice you have. I'm Beverly Jones. I manage singing talent. It's a little rough around the edges, but you definitely have something there. Are you wrapped?
Thanks. Wrapped?
You know, do you have an agent?
Well, no, but...
If you're looking for real talent, plant it and dig it. I'm the girl you're looking for, 'cause I'm the girl I'd be looking for if I were you, baby, yeah.
At that, Beverly stands up, handing Susie her card, and she tells her to give her a call if she's interested. From there, we cut across the school to Chucky and Tommy, who are having lunch. They see Vice Principal Pangborn punishing some kids that pulled a legendary prank by sprinkling powdered mashed potatoes on the football field and turning on the sprinklers.
Their detention's gonna be brutal.
Yeah, but it's proof they took a risk. Sure, they're paying the price, but they lived on the edge. Not me. I make safe, boring choices.
Not so boring. You got your lactose-free cottage cheese, your white bread with the crust sliced off, your vanilla ice cream.
See, I'm vanilla. Crustless vanilla finster.
As crustless Vanilla Finster reflects on how he was gonna get the chocolate mango ice cream but chickened out, he starts to get frustrated on how this is just the same pattern that he's always constantly in. Tommy tries to tell him that it's okay and that he should just be cool with who he is as a person, but Chucky doesn't like that. He says he doesn't want to be the same scaredy cat that he's always been. At that, he vows to start a new era and become a Chuck who lives dangerously and takes risks. As Tommy sits by feeling uneasy about Chucky's new outlook on life, we cut over to the Java Lava coffee shop where Chaz is running numbers and talking to Betty about how they desperately need to bring in more customers.
What you need is a gimmick, like weight machines. The Glutinator 8000. Been using it 3 times a week. Go ahead, pop a cup of Joe on top of that puppy. It won't spill a drop.
Oh, thanks.
If you really want to fill this joint, hold a talent night. People love to be entertained. You want to pack them in? You need to introduce a great undiscovered singer, who, by the way, you've known since she was practically in diapers.
Chaz thinks to himself for a moment before telling Angelica that's an excellent idea and that they should ask Susie Carmichael if she would perform. With a spit take and a scoff, Angelica says that she was talking about her, not Susie. Chaz says that he guesses they can have her take the stage before Susie, but of course Angelica throws a fit saying that she's no opening act. Just then, Betty comes up from behind and just absolutely tackles the hell out of Chaz.
Have you cracked your nut?
Well, actually, Betty, I think it was my spine.
This is Angelica you're dealing with. You really want to shut her up? Plus, if you put her on before Susie, there'll be no after.
Got it? Well, how about I put you on after Susie?
Believe me, they'll be relieved when I take the stage.
Nice work, Chaz.
As Chaz stands there in pain, asking Betty to take him to the emergency room again, we cut over to Susie's house, where her parents are talking to her about her interest in a career as a singer, saying that she should be realistic and reach for a career that puts all of her talents to use. Susie argues, saying that this puts her best talents to use and that she thinks she can make it.
So do thousands of girls, sweetheart. But so much of it is based on luck.
Look, Susie, it's not like we don't think you're a wonderful singer. We just don't want you to get hurt.
Her mom explains these are the years where she should be focusing on her academics so that she can set herself up for a future of success. Susie tries bringing up the talent agent who said that she does have a future, but her parents are very quick to brush it off.
Oh, honey, we've always supported all that you've wanted to do, but I'm afraid we have to insist you focus your attention on something more meaningful and realistic than being a pop star.
Over at school, we see Susie talking with her friends at lunch about the opportunity that's presented itself. Kimmy says that she thinks it's a great idea because Susie is incredibly talented. Meanwhile, Phil and Lil both agree that Susie is talented, but she's no massive star like their favorite pop icon Emika. As that conversation is happening, Angelica walks up agreeing with them and saying that Susie should just give it up.
If anyone's gonna be the next Emika, it's gonna be me. I already have backup singers. Oh yeah, and these guys.
I play electric guitar. I got the dancing fingers.
Yeah, well, remember to dance them to rehearsal tomorrow at 3. And don't be late. Lil?
She promised she'd introduce me to cute boys. Phil?
Blackmail, pure and simple.
Susie feels discouraged by all this, but with a nice pep talk, Kimmy tells her that she's got this in the bag. Over in the bathroom, we see Vice Principal Pangborn walk in when all of a sudden he's getting pummeled with basketball shoes, which have been glued to the ceiling. Of course, he gets really angry and goes to the locker room to yell at the boys and get to the bottom of this. At that point, we see Tommy is the one hiding the glue in his locker as he's terrified of getting caught. Meanwhile, Chucky is celebrating the fact that they're going down. At the last second before Pangborn approaches, though, Tommy stuffs Chucky in his locker so that he can play it cool and hopefully not get in trouble.
I smell fear. That's right. Smell it. So no one should think they can put one over on Slam Bang.
Chucky hops out of the locker room and Tommy says that was so close, to which he says not close enough. As Chucky plots his next risky move, we cut over to Susie, who's in the halls drinking from a water fountain. She sees an Emika poster on the wall and begins to daydream about herself being on stage as everyone cheers her name while she's performing to a massive audience. Her daydream ends and before you know it, we see her at a payphone.
Beverly, it's Susie Carmichael. When can you start making me a star?
Before you know it, we see Susie dancing and singing on stage, just knocking it out of the park, when the music pauses and Beverly tosses her a hand towel.
Much better. You're one of the quickest quick studies I've ever repped.
When I want something, I want it. By the way, who have you repped?
Only the best. And let me tell you, I think you're gonna be one of them.
Beverly tells Susie that she didn't want to spill the beans too early, but there's actually a few people at the record label that she works with who want to hear her sing. Susie is just floored, absolutely dumbfounded that things seem to be moving along so excellently. She asks Beverly if it's normal for things to be happening this fast in the industry, and Beverly tells her that it is, only when you're as talented and hardworking as Susie.
This is a dream come true. Do you know my parents didn't believe?
Now, Susie, you do know things like this don't pay for themselves. There's a studio to rent and musicians to hire.
Oh, of course, I know.
So I'm gonna need $1,000.
Wow, where are you gonna get it?
From you. I'm gonna need $1,000 from you.
$1,000?
Beverly basically tells Susie that it may seem like a lot of money now, but when she has that record deal, she's gonna be rolling in money and that'll seem like pocket change to her. She then says that if she's not ready, then she can just call them and cancel, but right before she clicks the button on her phone, Susie tells her that she'll come up with the money. Just like that, we fast forward to the cafeteria, where Vice Principal Pangborn is suffering at the hands of yet another prank on behalf of Tommy and Chucky. He gets himself a cup of ice cream, and the machine, as well as the soda dispenser next to it, starts to go crazy, spraying everywhere. Tommy and Chucky run away laughing, and the Vice Principal misses the two of them just by a hair. After that happens, we see Kimmy and Susie talking at their lockers. Susie's telling her all about how she needs to come up with $1,000, which her parents certainly aren't going to help with. Kimmy offers to loan her $100, which she's saved up, but Susie denies it, saying that'll just pay for a drumstick or two.
Hey, isn't your sister looking to buy a house?
Yes, so...
She's got money!
She needs it today so she can rent the studio and hire the musicians.
Why don't you ask Mom and...
They are so not down with this. Come on, Elisa. I promise I'll pay you back every penny plus interest as soon as I get this record deal.
Record deal? You still have to audition.
But they're gonna love me. I know it.
Elisa stresses how long that her and her boyfriend have been saving to buy a house together, but Susie pulls the sibling card, saying nowhere near as long as they've been sisters. When Susie tells her just how much this really means to her, Elisa reluctantly agrees to loan her the money as long as she agrees to never tell Mom and Dad about it. Susie gives her sister a huge hug and thanks her for supporting her dreams as we cut yet again to Tommy and Chucky, who are cooking up another prank for Pangborn.
Come on, Chuck, how long does it take to copy your butt?
I wasn't sure if I was letter or legal size. Tommy, is it me, or does this mold look like Phil?
I'll take your word for it. Let's get out of here.
Oh, this is so great! Pegboard's gonna freak when he looks up and sees this hanging on his wall instead of his diploma!
Tommy says that this is a terrible idea and that breaking into the vice principal's office is taking things to a whole different level. And of course, Chucky cheers, saying that's exactly why he wants to do it. He begins to shout, saying that he's getting the biggest rush out of always being 2 steps ahead of Pangborn. And wouldn't you know, as he yells about how much he loves flying close to the sun, but always being safe, Pangborn just so happens to walk by and he hears Chucky yelling about him from inside of the office supply room.
We're dead.
Perfect. Oh, it'll be worth every penny, you'll see. Here's the address and the time.
I've never been this excited.
Well, you should be, because this is your last day as the old Susie Carmichael. Tomorrow, your life is going to change forever.
Back over in the vice principal's office, we see Tommy explaining that all of these pranks were made in an effort to break Chucky out of a really sad and defeated rut that he's been stuck in, hoping that Pangborn will understand. However, he's not having any of it. feeling angered by the fact that the basketball shoes, ice cream machine, and the copy machine are all school property that they messed with.
Holy moly, that looks like Phil DeVille!
I thought so too.
Silence! Now what gruesome, painful punishment can I... Whoopsie! You don't want to get accidentally squashed by mean Mr. Tape Dispenser now, do you? What? You never seen compassion for animals before? Now, where was I?
You were gonna lay a gruesome, painful punishment on us. Might I suggest the spinning cobra clutch or the gorilla press?
As Chucky continues to press on about his excitement for getting beaten up by Pangborn, the ex-wrestler, Tommy is confused by how he was just talking so gently and delicately towards that ladybug. He asks Pangborn about it, and we learn that Chucky's reason for doing the things that he's been doing actually did resonate with him pretty closely, as behind the front that this big, strong, tough guy puts on is a soft side that also yearns to take risks. He says that though everyone thinks that he's this big, evil, angry man due to his wrestling persona, there's actually things about him that no one knows.
Like the fact that I spend my nights curled up by the fireside, writing my poetry.
What?
He means we love poetry.
Do not!
You guys want to hear some?
No, I want to lip out of here in a neck brace.
I call this one Sugar Rainbows. Sugar rainbows sparkle in the light as leprechauns giggle in their green tights.
Pangborn continues to serenade the two confused boys, and when he asks for feedback, Tommy says that it's like nothing that he's ever heard. Pangborn gets super excited, hopping over his desk at just the inkling that they think his poetry is good. Tommy tells Pangborn that his poetry is so good that he should perform some at Chucky's parents' coffee shop talent night.
Well, Finster, tell your folks to book me in.
Not until I'm twisted up like a Bavarian pretzel howling for mercy.
Red-headed freckle boy crying out for attention, though all that he wanted was a little detention.
From there, we cut across town where a bus is dropping off none other than Susie, who is super excited for her audition. She walks up to the door of the building, which has a for rent sign on it and doesn't seem to be currently occupied. She pulls the piece of paper that Beverly gave her out of her pocket, and she double checks the address as the guy who runs the shop next door greets her. She tells him that she's supposed to be meeting someone here and that she has an audition for a record company as she hands him the paper that Beverly gave her.
Record company? Ah, jeez, not again. Sorry to tell you this, kid, but there's never been a record company here. This place has been empty for months. You want I should call your mom and dad?
Hours later, we see Susie still sitting in the same exact spot at sunset, just looking completely broken and defeated, when Kimmy walks up, very excited and animated, asking her all about how it went, if there were a ton of people there, and if she got a massive contract. When Susie responds very bluntly and sadly that it didn't go anywhere, Kimmy asks her to explain and make sense of it all.
I let someone talk me into thinking I had talent, but what she was really trying to do was talk me out of $1,000, which she did. No one showed up. No one. There was never any record deal. I got conned, okay?
Oh, no.
And she sure picked the perfect person. I was just talented enough for her to trick me into believing I actually had what it took to make it big.
Kimmy tries to talk to Susie, telling her that Beverly may have made off with a lump sum of money, but she didn't take her talent. She tries to tell her that she does have what it takes to make it big, and that singing on stage tonight at the coffee shop will make her feel better. However, Susie runs away, saying that she's not singing tonight and that she might not ever sing again. Sometime later, we cut over to the Carmichael house where Susie is telling Elisa about what happened, and Elisa is feeling really upset about the fact that she didn't come with her to scope this lady out and keep Susie safe. Susie, however, basically apologizes to her and says that she's going to pay her back all of the money.
The money? Susie, worse things could have happened to you than just losing $1,000, okay? You hang out with someone you don't even know. Say yes to whatever she asks you to do. She could have taken it a lot further than she did. Think about it. Listen, as far as the money goes, how about you pay me back in 1,000 easy installments?
Thanks, Elisa.
Elisa sits down, telling Susie now that all this is behind her, she can focus on the important things. But Susie says that singing is an important thing to her. Elisa tells her that it's an excellent hobby, but this right here leads to a massive realization for Susie. She says that singing isn't just something that she does in her spare time for fun. It's who she is as a person, and it's what she's always wanted.
And still do. And I'm not gonna let some con artist in a fake designer suit stop me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a gig. Dig?
Over at the Java Lava, we see Chaz on stage attempting stand-up comedy and just completely bombing. As the audience sits there unenthused and some even start to leave, we cut to a little bit later where Vice Principal Pangborn has taken the stage and is getting viciously booed by these kids. For some, it's a genuine distaste for his poetry, and for others, like Phil, it's a grudge for him being such a strict vice principal. While the booing and anger keeps ramping up in intensity, Chaz starts to panic about the fact that Susie hasn't shown up yet, and she's supposed to be on next.
Chaz, you gotta get him off the stage before furniture starts a-flying.
You don't think they throw furniture at him, do you?
Are you nuts? That's Slam Bang Bang Born. He'd throw it at them.
Mr. Slambag, sir, would you mind
Off the stage.
Take your bitch off that brave and gentle distributor of caffeinated beverages, you big galoot!
As Chaz, Betty, and Pangborn continue their triple threat match into the crowd, Angelica takes this as the perfect opportunity to help herself to the stage. She grabs her microphone and Harold plugs in his guitar as they proceed to literally perform one of the worst songs that you'll likely ever hear in your life. Seriously, enough to make you want to donate your ears to charity.
Don't want you to be the only one I'm dating. Oops, gotta put you on hold. Oops, gotta put you on hold. And
Oh, I knew you'd come.
She didn't steal my talent, right?
No, but someone stole hers.
As the just terrible song continues, we see Dill's dancing get more and more extreme until he ends up bumping into Angelica and sending her full-blown flying off of the stage. The crowd continues booing Angelica and yelling about how they want their money back as Kimmy tells Susie to get up there before Angelica starts a riot. The crowd practically has a foot out the door already, but when they hear Susie start to sing, they all turn around and get right back to their seats, hypnotized by the sound of Susie's voice. As everybody enjoys Susie's song, we see none other than Elisa walk into the shop, giving her sister a big proud smile and a thumbs up in approval. While Susie enjoys her moment, we see Chucky approach Vice Principal Pangborn, asking him if it's time to go back to being a big, scary wrestler now. On the contrary, however, Pangborn thanks Chucky for showing him just how badly he wanted to let his sensitive side out more often, and on that note, he gives both of them detention, sentencing them to chisel off the glue that they put on the bathroom ceiling.
That's it? No spinning toe hold? No figure four leg lock?
You gotta be kidding me. You haven't gotten this danger thing out of your system?
Not a chance. I'm not finished flirting with danger, and it's not finished flirting with me.
Oh, great. What's next? Robbing a bank?
Something even more dangerous. I am gonna walk right out to Marcy Mazira's and say...
And just like that, with everyone celebrating Susie and her taking a well-deserved bow, the episode comes to an end. Now, there's so much to say about this episode, but we certainly need to start at the tip of the iceberg. The beginning of the episode, when we see Beverly casually walking up to place a business card to lure someone in, when Susie catches her attention. She heard Susie's singing voice and immediately looked at her with an impression that, at first glance, you wouldn't think much about. However, in hindsight, knowing how this would progress and where things would go from here, we can't help but wonder about Beverly's intentions from the start. We all know that her intention was to rip someone off. That's clear as day. Nevertheless, we have to ask, why Susie? Why would she target Susie of all kids? Sure, we could jump to say that it's because she was the one person who was singing that Beverly came across, but yet she also met Angelica, who was way more enthusiastic and pushy than Susie was. Susie's rationale was that she was just talented enough for Beverly to make her believe that she had what it took. But we all know that Angelica blatantly thought that she had what it took regardless of talent. Angelica was practically ready to eat out of the palm of Beverly's hand. However, Beverly just ignores her and instead focuses on Susie, who actually has talent. But at its core, for Beverly, none of this is even about talent. In asking the question, why Susie, it's imperative for us to analyze this initial interaction between the three: Beverly, Susie, and Angelica. It's interesting realizing in doing that, their actions and demeanors all screamed completely different vibes. Susie, although her talent shined through clear as day, came across very naive and unsure. Meanwhile, Angelica came across very brazen and just ready to sign anything that this lady would have thrown at her. Beverly, on the other hand, came across completely predatory in many different ways. First of all, she approached casually using terms like repped to make herself seem like she was super official, and at the same time using terms like that as a manipulation tactic to make Susie feel like she wasn't versed in the world of singing at all, meanwhile Beverly herself was. Additionally, she approaches and right out the gate, she compliments Susie's voice, then immediately says that it's rough around the edges, but that she does have something there. This right here is yet another blatant manipulation tactic. She does this to make Susie feel like she's not good enough at singing, yet she could be, if only there was some secret sauce that could make it happen. Then, when she uses these professional terms and makes herself seem a certain way, of course it leaves Susie feeling like she could only be good enough with this specific lady's help because she comes across so confident and clearly knows what she's doing. To top it all off, at the end, Beverly ends up walking away with a look on her face that just screams bad intentions. She wore her mask well as she was directly interacting with Susie and Angelica, but the second she turned around, it was written all over her face that she was up to no good. When we take a step back and analyze this whole interaction in hindsight, this entire approach and first impression was deeply calculated by Beverly to target Susie specifically in a way that makes her feel like she isn't good enough and that she needs Beverly, which in turn would lead to Susie eating from the palm of her hand. She knew this would get Susie exactly where she wanted her. From there, we saw the manipulation from Beverly continue to unravel even further and in more grotesquely calculated ways. At that point, when she has Susie practicing on stage at school with a boombox, she goes out of her way to tell her that her performance is getting much better, and that she's one of the quickest quick studies that she's ever repped. This right here is a cleverly disguised way for her to continue to make Susie doubt herself and feel like she needs Beverly now more than ever. She doesn't tell Susie that she was excellent. She says much better to indicate more improvement is needed, Yet she tells Susie that she's improving very quickly to make Susie feel like she's going in the right direction quicker than most do, which she knows good and well Susie is going to attribute to her help. This right here is just a blatant attempt on Beverly's part to trap Susie right where she wants her and get her in just the right position to spring the finances on her. Beverly likely knows from pulling this scheme in the past that the hardest part is when she tells the target that they need to come up with the money. With that being said, she's likely learned by now that if she saves that moment for a point in time when she has them taking the bait and of course feeling like they're on top of the world because their dreams are finally coming true, then the target is much more likely to believe her. The calculated timing of when she springs that question on her target is absolutely crucial, and Beverly knows that good and well. This is shown even further by how when Susie shows doubt, Beverly acts like she's going to call someone to cancel the appointment that doesn't even exist in an effort to essentially spark a twisted fear of missing out within Susie that Beverly herself is manufacturing. With Susie feeling like she's the next big hit pop star and that it's all progressing so quickly, it's not surprising that when all of that is threatened, she's kind of a deer in headlights. We have to ask though, why didn't Beverly consider targeting Angelica? I mean, if this woman isn't actually a manager out scouting for talent, then Angelica's singing sounding like nails on a chalkboard should be irrelevant to her. You'd think that she would go out of her way to target the most overly confident person who's basically a walking billboard for my mommy and daddy have a ton of money, which, I mean, that pretty much sums up Angelica. One would assume that a con artist would strive to find targets that have clear as day high value. I mean, that's not to say that Angelica's family is better off than Susie's, but that is to say that Angelica wears it on her sleeve way more blatantly than Susie does. One look at Susie, and you might not guess that her dad is a famous show writer and that her mom is a doctor. Meanwhile, Angelica, let's just say if you don't figure it out at first glance, it won't take long of hearing what comes out of her mouth before you start thinking, I wonder what stock your daddy got lucky on. Another thing to consider as far as Beverly and her con goes would be the timeline and how who she targets would potentially hinder that. I mean, think about it. Whereas Susie needed time to consider the offer and get back to Beverly, as well as find a way to get the money, this woman could have probably had a quick yes and some money from Angelica by the end of the first day, and that would have been that. It ultimately leaves us wondering. There were a ton of reasons that she could have chosen Angelica as a target. Why didn't she? She would have made just as much money, and she would have likely made it quicker than she did with Susie, which in turn would have left her able to move on to her next target quicker. As we follow this stream of subtle hints from Beverly, we find ourselves wondering a few things along the way of this journey. Could this choice of target be motivated by more than just who she could have extorted the most money from? And furthermore, could Beverly actually be a talent manager working on behalf of a record label? Analyzing that stream of hints would ultimately plunge us into an ocean of real-world instances and harrowing cases of actual people facing similar things to what Susie did. The fact of the matter is, there are a ton of factors at play in how a con artist like Beverly could pick their target, whether they're working on their own or operating on behalf of a bigger entity. Of course, they're going to consider how much they stand to gain from the scam, the likelihood of the person they're scamming trying to take legal action or pursue them in any way, and likely many other things. As far as ripping someone off in the music industry goes, there's a long history of not only blatant illegal cons like we saw here, a lot of which go unreported, but also, as twisted as it is, completely legal manipulation of people, specifically of African American artists. This goes back decades, if not maybe even more than a century now if we're considering cases that likely weren't documented. Going back to the 1950s, it was actually pretty common that black musicians would write a song, and as it would catch the attention of a white musician, they would rewrite it and end up seeing a mountain of success. Meanwhile, the original writer would oftentimes be overlooked. This was actually the case for Little Richard and his famous song Tutti Frutti. Sure, a lot of people ended up seeing him as an absolute legend and a pioneer of rock and roll, rightfully so. But for context, this man grew up in a religious household as one of 12 kids. By age 13, he was thrown out of the house, allegedly because of his sexual orientation. After years of grinding odd jobs and pursuing singing, he got offered a contract by age 19. However, he saw little success. He was tossed between a few record labels and put out a few songs which didn't do all too well. However, one day on break between recording, he sat down at the piano and started belting out Tutti Frutti, which was an original song that he used to play as filler back in the nightclub scene when he was up and coming. The tune was unlike anything else on the airwaves, and it was clear that they were sitting on a hit. However, his original version was seen as too vulgar for the radio at the time. The record label decided to hire a songwriter, Dorothy Labostri, to change some of the more provocative lyrics into more innocent and clean ones. This version of the song would be the one that he would officially release. However, even with the cleaned up lyrics, the song was still seen as a rebel anthem that had all of the rebellious kids and teens bopping their heads while their parents were wagging their fingers in disapproval. That, combined with his kind of flamboyant performances, out there style, and his faintly androgynous persona, would ultimately result in him being seen as too radical for mainstream audiences, which were predominantly white back in the 50s. As a result, very, very shortly after Little Richard's version was released, a white singer by the name of Pat Boone had recorded his own version of the song that was intended to appeal to white audiences. Pat Boone would ultimately end up seeing far greater success and record sales, even though his version definitely lacked the passion that the original had. In the long run, many feel that Little Richard won, as historically he was the one who wrote that song, as well as a few others that Pat Boone covered, and as the decades would pass, many extremely famous artists would continue to cover Little Richard's songs, as he laid the framework for generations of artists to come. But that certainly doesn't erase the fact that his breakout hit was profited on by a white artist more than he himself. It's crazy that in the 50s it was actually pretty common for the same song to be charting twice. The original version, which was written by a black artist, and the version that was rewritten by white people for white people. Like some kind of messed up prejudiced version of Kidz Bop. Another really sad example of this would be the tragic story of Big Mama Thornton. This woman could sing the blues like no other. She had a similar story to Little Richard, growing up in a religious household, but she was one of 7 children. Her mother tragically passed away when she was only in 3rd grade, and she had to stop attending school to get a job cleaning spittoons at a tavern. Along the way, though, she had always had a love for the blues. Growing up, she taught herself to play the harmonica by watching her brother when she was just 8 years old. From there, her musical talents expanded in a similar way, learning to sing extremely well and even play the drums just through her experiences, without any formal lessons. By 14, her talent was discovered and she ended up going on the road for many years as part of a traveling stage show. However, eventually, she ended up leaving due to her being owed quite a big lump sum of money that they refused to pay her. From there, she would go on to record music under a record label. Her biggest hit of all was the iconic song Hound Dog. However, she didn't write that song. It was written for her by a pair of writers. She was the first one to perform it, though. Her rendition would go on to sell over 500,000 copies and spend months at #1 on the R&B chart. She went on to write and perform many other songs, and her performances would have crowds on their feet dancing and singing from coast to coast. Few short years after she would record Hound Dog, however, Elvis Presley would record his version, which would go on to become the most famous version, gaining far more recognition and sales than her original recording of the song had ever seen. Granted, sure, we're talking about royalties from a song that neither of them wrote, but when we contemplate the fact that Elvis Presley co-wrote only a select few of his songs, you can't help but connect the dots on how messed up it is that because these songs were coming out in a time of extreme segregation and racial prejudice, he saw far more success than many of the black artists that he was covering, which includes Little Richard as well, by the way. I mean, Big Mama Thornton wrote many original songs of her own and was self-taught. She arguably had to work way harder than Elvis, considering the time period that they were both active in. And, well, Elvis, who still was in the middle of a successful career, brought himself to the point of, quote, a grotesque caricature of his sleek, energetic former self. Grossly overweight, his mind dulled by the pharmacopoeia he daily ingested, he was barely able to pull himself through his abbreviated concerts. Yet, when Elvis died in the 70s, it made so many waves that even the President of the United States commented on how much of an impact that he had made. Like, his body was so coveted that they had to move its burial site because people tried to steal it. Meanwhile, Big Mama Thornton would pass away only 7 years after him of a heart attack and liver issues, penniless in a boarding house in Los Angeles, only to be subsequently buried in a shared grave with 2 strangers because her family couldn't afford to have a burial or a funeral. I already know good and well that someone's going to chime into the comments saying, oh, well, Elvis did this and Elvis did that, and honestly, that doesn't matter. Elvis was a puppet singing songs that he didn't write, in a time when white people were put on a pedestal. The person pulling the strings of that puppet, a record producer who launched Elvis's career with hopes to bring the sound of African American music to a wider audience. The fact still stands that if these African American musicians weren't facing extreme racism and looked over in favor of less talented white musicians that were deemed more marketable, then people like Big Mama Thornton, Little Richard, and certainly Elvis Presley would definitely have lived vastly different lives than they had. Keep in mind too, these are just 2 notable examples. There are so many other cases of this happening. Back in the 80s, there was the R&B group New Edition, started by a then 12-year-old Bobby Brown with his friends. They would literally be the first iteration of the modern boy band. After their first major tour, the boys would be dropped off at their homes in the projects and each given a check for $1.87. Having been royally screwed by this record label after all of this work, they sued to get out of their contract and got with a different label who also screwed them over, then to another record label whom they had to borrow so much money from to get out of contracts with other labels that they had to basically record and tour on behalf of that label to pay off their debts to them. The sad truth was that this was a blatant case of rich white executives profiting off of the talent and success of a group of black kids from the projects. Fast forwarding to the 90s, TLC would see a similar struggle with executives completely destroying them financially. These poor women were forced to file bankruptcy at the height of their careers. Seriously, these women were on top of the world, with 4 different songs in the top 5 in the Billboard Hot 100 chart from the same album, winning multiple Grammys as well as Billboard's Artist of the Year. These women were getting completely destroyed by their record label, left bringing home less than $50,000 each after selling millions upon millions of albums. Ultimately, they went on record saying the more successful that their hit record Crazy Sexy Cool became, the more debt they would be in thanks to the label. On top of that, under their contract they were in, they only made 56 cents for each album sold, which they, of course, had to split between the 3 of them, which is astronomically less than what most recording artists were making at the time. I mean, even in the 2020s, we've seen musicians like Megan Thee Stallion struggling with legal issues surrounding contracts that severely limit her earnings, as well as her creative control for her own music. Granted, time has moved on, and the United States has moved on from the 1950s. Somehow, black artists being taken advantage of is somehow something that is still very prevalent. Now, it's clear that in the context of this episode, Susie was the target here. But whether or not that was intended to be racially motivated, we have to recognize that this episode is a very accurate portrayal of deceit towards black artists that has been going on for as long as monetized art has existed. On top of that though, in this one, we not only saw Susie get scammed by this supposed manager, we also saw Angelica being handed the headliner spot at the show at the Java Lava. Of course, we have to acknowledge that it was because they didn't want her to scare off the customers, but still, it falls in line with the sad stigma of how many truly talented black artists end up being overlooked in favor of a less talented white person who was handed the headlining spot because they were unjustly deemed, quote, more marketable by the executives and people in charge behind the scenes. If there's any other big point that I wanted to bring up as to why Beverly may not have chosen Angelica to be her target, it would be one that circles back to something I brought up earlier. The risk assessment of whether or not the target is likely to retaliate. There's a chance that when Beverly initially met these two, she saw them and thought that a little brazen girl like Angelica is very likely to make a huge Karen scene and try to track down the scam artist and take legal action if she were the victim of a con like this. Little does she know, she's probably right, and Charlotte and Drew's team of lawyers would likely have at least tried to track Beverly down. Meanwhile, Beverly could have seen Susie and perceived her as a down-to-earth, soft-spoken person who is more likely to be thankful that something worse didn't happen to her and try to move on in stride rather than go on a vengeance-fueled hunt. On that note though, of course, we have to talk about how much of a degenerate piece of absolute human waste that Beverly is. It makes me sick that this woman's lungs fill with the same air that mine do. The fact that this woman would target a young girl wanting to chase her dreams just to make a quick $1,000 is absolutely deplorable. I find her completely disgusting. There isn't a single thing that anyone could possibly say that could excuse that kind of thievery. On top of being a massive pile of regurgitated excrement, she's also a terrible liar. When she said that she needed $1,000, her tell was literally written all over her face. Susie likely could have been able to tell from a mile away that this woman was lying if she wasn't so swept up in the excitement of it all. Again, this circles back to the manipulation techniques. Beverly being able to lie got easier and easier the more that Susie let her guard down and started to trust her. Then, of course, when it came to springing the financial aspect on her, Beverly strategically waited until Susie was at the height of her excitement to tell her, knowing that she would be so swept up in the thrill of it all that she wouldn't even stop to consider that she might be getting played by a con artist. What it really comes down to is that on all levels, through and through, Beverly is more putrid than the unwashed bathrooms at the beach after a long day. Not gonna lie, I will admit, though the industry can be nearly as scummy as Beverly is, I would be surprised if she really was operating on behalf of a bigger entity like a record label. However, I wouldn't be surprised if she was just a racist con artist going around specifically targeting young, talented African American singers. For me personally, the most painful part of this episode was that moment when realization hits Susie like a ton of bricks and she realizes what's happened. That guy from the shop next door tells her about this ongoing scam and offers to call her parents for her, but she just walks away and sits down. At this moment, if you look closely, the tears well up in her eyes for just a split second, but then they stop. And she just drops that piece of paper on the ground with a completely flat expression on her face. This right here, if you can relate to it, is something that they portrayed in such a mind-blowing way. That feeling of just being so defeated and feeling like you were played so hard that like you want to cry and you start to, but then it just stops. Because there's no tears to cry. Because you're just so stunned and empty. The shock of it all, the betrayal, feeling inadequate because you didn't see it coming when it all just seems so obvious now. Sure, for me and likely anyone else who can also relate to this, it's probably not a case of relating because you've been ripped off by someone pretending that they're going to make you a star, but it's more of a general empathy for that feeling when you realize that someone you trusted was a wolf in sheep's clothing all along. This moment right here, even if you've never been there, odds are you felt that secondhand pain for Susie. Now, going in a bit of a different direction, on a brighter note, can we talk about how great of a sister that Elisa is to Susie? I mean, we saw her parents and even some of her closest friends not believing in Susie's dream. But Elisa? She never even said whether or not she believed in Susie. However, she was willing to put $1,000 on the line investing in her sister's dreams. Just the act of being willing to support her dreams when no one else in her family was, it really shows a lot about Elisa as well as the general family dynamic in the Carmichael household. On top of that though, for Elisa, her biggest concern was Susie's safety. That $1,000 was the last thing on her mind, as she pointed out to Susie. She's right too. This entire situation had the propensity to go extremely bad, and Susie is very lucky that she didn't get pulled into something a lot more dark and sinister. In all reality, this episode is one that I love so much because it's just amazing how they portrayed a really big full circle moment. We wouldn't see much of Elisa in All Grown Up, but if you were a fan of the original Rugrats, you'd certainly recall that she was a teenager in that show when Susie was just a toddler. Fast forwarding to the future in this show, having Susie now be the teenager and Elisa is experiencing adulthood, the events of this episode hit extra hard, taking in the fact that Susie is now pretty much in the same position that Elisa was in the original Rugrats. There's a good likelihood that Elisa sees a lot of herself when she was that age in Susie. Another really important thing to consider though is all of the background that we got on Susie's family in the original series. Between her siblings, her parents, Great Aunt T and Uncle Charles, it's always been shown just how important family is to the Carmichaels. In one episode in particular, we would see Susie's mom Lucy being a young adult and struggling to afford college tuition. When she needed financial help to chase her dreams, Aunt T was there to help her, no questions asked, because she believed in Lucy. Fast forwarding to this episode, seeing Elisa doing something similar for Susie, it just really made this feel even more like a full circle moment, as it's certainly a callback to the original series. If there's anything else that I'd love to touch on in closing, it would be how the subplot in this one was about Chucky and how he wanted to live on the edge for once. For me personally, I really like it because it parallels what Susie has going on very well. She was taking risks and living on the edge in a sense. She was reaching for the stars and chasing her dreams, putting herself and her sister's money on the line for a hopeful career as a singer. Meanwhile, Chucky was just simply trying to step outside of his comfort zone in general. Sadly for Susie though, she would end up learning a lot more of a tough lesson than Chucky did. One thing I do really appreciate about this is that in the original Rugrats, Chucky had a crush on Susie, which as a result makes it feel kind of like their characters going through plots simultaneously is fitting. It is a little frustrating though, because I always thought seeing this show as a kid that it would have made for a more interesting story if Susie was Chucky's love interest. Honestly, I recall throughout the course of this show there being a few different random girls that Chucky had a crush on, but none of them really stuck. Like the girl we saw in this episode. We don't even know who this random side character that they threw in at the end is. They make it seem like Chucky saying hi to this random popular girl that none of us know in the end is a big risky move, when I feel like it would have been a lot more of a hard-hitting moment for the big risky move to be him telling Susie that he likes her just after she blew everyone away at her concert and is having her big moment. As far as a cohesive story with a full circle moment goes, it would have made for a big climactic ending if we had seen these two stories kind of converge into one, and it feels like a bit of a missed opportunity considering that they spent so much time showing Susie and Chucky liking each other as kids. Admittedly though, I feel like that would have drawn away from the attention that the main storyline deserved. This one was about Susie, and it showcased not only a really dark and awful time in her life, but it also showed us how strong of a person that she is, and it proved just how easily she can overcome emotional roadblocks. As we come to a conclusion here though, I can't help but wonder if Nickelodeon and Rugrats knew what they were doing. Was this just meant to be a simple episode and they were blissfully unaware of the historical accuracy of what they were portraying? Or is this another case of them showing a very strong awareness of a societal problem that's gone widely overlooked for far too long? Of course, I'm dying to know, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. I always love seeing your guys' feedback. Of course, I have to give a shout out to my friends in the true 90s kids tier. None of this would even be possible without your support, and I can't thank you enough for being such a crucial part of my YouTube journey. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like and stick around for another nostalgic walk down memory lane. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next one. Peace.